the young Dick Smith, AC. For the Hansard record, could you please give your name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Yes, I'm Dick Smith. I'm appearing here as a previous chairman of the Civil Aviation Authority and the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, and a person who's vitally interested in aviation in Australia.
That'll be a slight understatement.
Yep.
Mr Smith, you've lodged a submission to the inquiry which the committee has received as submission number 2. Would you like to make any amendments or additions to your submission?
No changes at all.
Would you like to make a brief opening statement?
Well, just a very quick statement to say that I've been involved in aviation on the regulatory and government side since about 1988, I think it was, when Gareth Evans appointed me to the board of the Civil Aviation Authority. And then a couple of years later, with the support of Bob Hawke, I was made chairman of CAA. And at that stage, it was just after the Henry Bosch report, where the Civil Aviation Authority was set up separate to government as a government business enterprise, and it ran safety regulation, air traffic control and rescue and firefighting. And the plans then, with discussions with Bob Hawke and Paul Keating I had, were to go on with further reforms and bring in competition with the rescue and firefighting, with air traffic control, and even possibly split the air traffic control side into 2 organisations, one in Brisbane, one in Melbourne, that would have a certain amount of competition with each other. Unfortunately, none of those reforms went ahead, and I suppose my major concern at the moment, as a 71-year-old, the Queen's birthday, I got this wonderful award, and listed there was my services to aviation, but in fact I'd failed. I'd never completed the important reforms, and that's motivated me to get back involved again. I'd tried to turn off for the last 10 years, and I'd just love to see some of the reforms that were original plan of the Hawke-Keating Labor government, that really have been the only government that have really done much with reform in aviation. I think they should be looked at again and completed.
Thank you very much. Senator Xenophon.
Can we just go to your submission, Mr Smith, and thank you for your submission. You've got real concerns about the automatic dependent surveillance broadcast regulation impact statement. Can you just take us through that? Because what you've said in your submission, what general aviation operators are telling me, is that there's a real crisis looming in terms of the affordability and sustainability of general aviation in this country. Is that overstating it from your point of view?
Yes, and before I talk about
how serious is it?
It's an extremely serious situation where the general aviation industry is extremely depressed at the moment. To give you an example, our leading general aviation airport, Bankstown, about 20 years ago did about 500,000 movements a year. It's now down to about 270,000. And when you would consider that just about every other equivalent industry would have grown quite considerably in the last 20 years, to have such a staggering decrease. I keep one of my aircraft at Bankstown Airport, and of recent times on a weekend, the one shop doesn't even open. So there's just so few people there. And if you walk around some of the hangars which had thriving general aviation maintenance businesses or training businesses, they're closed up, they're chained up, and if you peer in, you can see junk is being stored inside. And this has come about mainly because of just a one-way ratchet of increasing costs and regulation over the last 20 years or so, without an understanding that, dare I say it, safety has to be affordable by the marketplace. And if you put airline-type regulations onto small planes, an airline with 200 or 300 people can easily share the high cost of expensive safety regulation, but an aircraft with 10 passengers clearly can't. And all that happens is the business closes down, you don't have a marketplace, and so you get towns like Mudgee and like that, people having to drive. They don't have an air service anymore. I recently completed a flight. I fly all the time. I'm very fortunate. I have a number of aircraft, and I completed a flight 14 days from home right out to Warburton in Western Australia and back. And the only general aviation, I landed probably 14 airports in the 2 weeks, maybe a few more. The only general aviation I saw was at Parkes Aerodrome, where 2 small planes came in and landed to refuel. I walked over to the pilots. They were Chinese citizens who were learning to getting their licences. They were employed by China Southern, that owned the China Southern Flying School at Mangalore. and they were going to get their flying licences in Australia because the weather is good. And all I could work out is we would sell some fuel to the company. That would be about the benefit of Parkes Airport for that flying. And I can see a situation in the next decade or so where Qantas and Virgin will be demanding these special visas to bring Chinese pilots in because we simply don't have enough pilots.
Because of the collapse in part of general aviation.
Basically, completely unnecessary and unintentional. The people who are causing this, which is the people at the Civil Aviation Safety Authority and the people at Air Services Australia, are quite horrified if I mention any of this, and they say, no, it's nothing to do with them. But it is, unfortunately. It's unintentional, but it's major damage, which is quite unnecessary.
The regulation impact statement that you refer to, was that done in about 2008, 2009? What year?
I understand it was done in 2009, and if I can just explain to you about automatic dependent surveillance broadcast. It's a great idea. It's a little black box which sits in the aeroplane and transmits the GPS position. We all know of GPS in someone's motor vehicle. It transmits that position back to air traffic control. In Australia, we have two major centres, Brisbane and Melbourne, and so the position of your aircraft will appear there. Now, that you would think adds to safety, and in fact, Sir Angus Houston, in an article in The Australian a couple of weeks ago, where he was rebuffing my criticism, he said, in effect, Dick Smith is wrong, we don't need to do airspace change because we've leapfrogged into automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, and Australia is indeed leading the world. Unfortunately, what wasn't mentioned is that most of our aircraft in country areas fly in non-controlled airspace. We're very unusual. I did send this document to every senator. It's the document when I was involved, believe it or not, way back in 12th of December 1991, and it was the AMAT's airspace changes, and it shows on June of 93, it says stage 4, IFR to IFR separation provided in low-level airspace, and that means instrument flight rule planes, which are ones in cloud, are going to be separated, which means they're going to be controlled by air traffic control in low-level airspace. And you'd think that's very strange, aren't they now? But no, in Australia we had a system where air traffic control basically controlled the high-level airspace and the major airports.
What's high level?
Pardon?
Is that 10,000 feet and above?
Above about 24,500 feet en route, and stepping down to the major airports, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. And then there was a separate union, the flight service officers, that gave radio information to pilots, and pilots became their own air traffic controllers. And I was the chairman in 91 where the board decided that the first step to moving to a more modern airspace system, we would increase controlled airspace. So aeroplanes at busy country airports would indeed be controlled from the centre in Melbourne or Brisbane. Unfortunately, that's never happened. We've never actually done the upgrade of the airspace, and there's a good reason for this. First of all, most airline pilots, having learnt in the uncontrolled do-it-yourself system, like that system, and it's so far not resulted in a mid-air collision. We've had some very near problems with it, and we did have an accident at Benalla that could have possibly been solved by controlled airspace. But pilots are picked psychologically normally to follow rules. The best pilots are the ones that follow the training they've got. That's what we want. If you then decide to change the rules, people naturally resist unless there's some really good leadership and communication. That unfortunately failed, and so as of today, which you can work out from 93 to now, it must be, is that 22 years or so? 22 years later, we still have no low level, it's called Class E controlled airspace. So at a place like Ballina, we managed to get, by the way, the controlled airspace down to 8,500 feet from 24,500 feet. So that was the start. But where the collision risk is greatest, which is close to the airport, and there's a chance of running into a mountain, which air traffic control can prevent, because if you're on a radar screen, there can be an alarm system which rings an alarm to the controller if you're off track. But in Australia, at places like Ballina and every non-tower airport in Australia, that have to be that take airline traffic, I'd say 50 or 60, are in completely uncontrolled airspace. And that means the pilot, when they're in cloud, call each other and hopefully self-separate. Just yesterday there was a terrible accident in Irian Jaya, and I'm sure when it comes out we'll find that, first of all, the plane, 50 passengers were killed. It won't have been flown by Stone Age people. They will be competent, internationally ICAO-rated pilots. The plane will be equipped with an enhanced ground proximity warning system, but the most likely cause of the accident, because it's the most common accident by professional pilots in the world, will be a controlled flight into terrain. And we'll find that that's non-controlled airspace in Irian Jaya, and someone has possibly made an error, a human error, which is not hard to do, and descended off the track below the minimum safe altitude.